provisions and AFM at last week's meeting. And members agreed a number of actions to take forward with the department, which the committee team have now actioned. So just to remind that also at last week's meeting, some members discussed the possibility of the committee requesting its own legal advice in terms of the potential to compel religious orders and other relevant institutions to contribute financially to the redress scheme. So my mistake, I forgot to formally put that to the committee. I'm just going to ask, are you content that we okay? We're content that. So I think we have consensus, so we're now going to request legal advice on this matter. Okay, also to advise members that the committee has now been sent the delegated powers memorandum. Sorry,
just
please go ahead.
In respect of that legal advice,
yes.
and this is not any reflection on internal legal advice available from the Assembly,
yes.
but given the very niche and important and particular area,
okay.
I think we need to be clear that I would encourage, if the only route is through the internal legal services of the Assembly, that they in turn be permitted to reach out to expert external advice in respect of this matter.
That's a good point. Yep. Okay, go ahead please, Timothy.
Just on that, completely agree with Stuart. There's no point in this committee getting legal advice that we can't do anything with. It needs to be that we have the power. I've said before that the legal advice is vested in the committee, and the committee should have the power then to release that. But certainly for this matter, there's no point us having something in the room if we can't use that to compel the religious orders to cough up. We should have, we are the client, and we should have it within our power and within our gift. And there needs to be an understanding expectation on the legal advice that we're getting, that will be the potential route for it.
Well, I suppose the legal advice would allow us then to look at our own particular committee amendment.
Yes.
So it wouldn't necessarily have to become a public document per se, but it would be stuff that we would rely on then when we speak to the Bills Office, for example, around how we would have something drafted if they come back and say that it would be legally possible.
At the same time, if it's just for this committee, it can't be something that's referenced outside the room. Whereas you have other people in the Assembly chamber, when you're talking to your amendment in the Assembly, you have to have something, you know, that has solid foundation.
Oh yes.
I think a speaker would be the mechanism for that.
Yes.
So for example, they'll look at amendments to see if they're within scope and also that they meet certain criteria. If the legal advice is saying that this can be done, then the speaker will clear that to be done, and that will be the reference rather than sharing the advice. You could share the advice with the Speaker's office for the purposes of getting the amendment if they ask for it, but other than that you still have to go back to legal services and ask for permission to be shared with the Speaker's office. That's the protocol here.
Well, it's a fair point. We need to find a way that it reflects why we feel that our amendment's within scope and legally competent. Okay, so I was just starting there around the delegated powers memorandum that's been now been sent from the department, and you can find this on pages 24 to 44 of your pack. And the memorandum identifies provisions that confer powers to make delegated legislation in the bill. So just asking for your agreement to note this memorandum pending the oral evidence session with the examiner of statutory rules at our meeting that is now scheduled for Wednesday the 10th of September. Okay, agreed. So to advise, as you know, the bill passed its second stage in the Chamber yesterday, and the committee stage commences formally today. So we're proposing to write to all the Assembly statutory committees and seek their views on issues in the bill which may be of their interest. Are we agreed?
Right.
Okay. Okay, so moving on then, the Commissioner for Older People Northern Ireland. So just to remind, at last week's meeting the committee received an introductory briefing from the Commissioner for Older People Northern Ireland. During the oral evidence session they mentioned a current survey on the Commissioner's priorities for a new corporate plan for 2025-2029. So just to advise that a copy of the survey can be found in pages 45 to 47 of your pack. Okay. PSNI Race and Ethnicity Action Plan update. Just to advise that the committee has received a written update from the PSNI on their Race and Ethnicity Action Plan, which can be found on pages 48 to 52 of the meeting pack. The plan outlines their commitments alongside actionable steps to address racial and ethnic disparities. So just to remind members that we've also received that invitation from the PSNI to the launch of the plan, which was included in last week's meeting pack, and the PSNI has also sent a copy of the Race and Ethnicity Action Plan consultation report. So just to ask members if you wish to seek an oral briefing from the PSNI following the launch of the plan as part of its September to December forward work programme. We agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. So just further to that then, just to advise, the committee has received a response from the Chief Constable regarding the recent incidents of disorder across Northern Ireland, which can be found on pages 3 to 7 of the table pack, and to advise that the PSNI response to the recent disorder is outlined in the correspondence, which includes increased patrols, community engagement, hate crime investigation, public messaging, partnership working, service mobilisation, mutual aid and a funding appeal. So just to advise, the Chief Constable has also outlined that the PSNI currently spends around £20 million per year on legacy issues, almost all redirected from the main grant funding. So obviously that leads into another part of our area of work. So just asking you to note this correspondence, and no doubt we can pick that up when we have the evidence session with the PSNI. Okay, Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme. Just to advise that the scheme which opened for applications on the 31st of August 2021 is currently scheduled to close to applications on the 30th of August 2026. So just to advise, in order to highlight the closure of the scheme in August 2026, the committee will wish to consider a draft press release to be published this August 2025, highlighting the scheme's closure in 1 year and urging those eligible to apply. And the draft press release can be found in page 53 of the meeting pack. I'm just wondering, can that be read into the record? Have you got it there?
Yes, hold on, sorry.
That's okay, no problem.
Yes.
It's quite long. Oh,
It
it's
is.
quite long actually.
I can read it in. Just quickly. So the press release says an Assembly Committee is urging anyone eligible to apply as soon as possible to a scheme making payments to those injured during the Troubles before it closes next year. As the 4th anniversary of the Troubles Permanent Disablement Payment Scheme founding approaches, the Committee for the Executive Office is calling on anyone who has permanent physical or psychological injuries related to the Troubles to check if they qualify for payment. Paula Bradshaw, Chair of the Executive Office Committee, said this scheme, set up in 2021, will only accept applications for another 12 months until the 31st of August 2026. Its aim is to acknowledge the serious harm caused by those living with permanent disabilities caused by a Troubles-related incident. I'm calling on anyone who thinks they or a loved one might be eligible for the scheme to find out more and submit an application as soon as they can. This will allow adequate time for their claim to be processed before the closing date. The Victims Payments Board is an independent body which manages the scheme, and you can make an application using the online portal on its website or by downloading an application form. You can also request a hard copy of the application form. The payments are intended to recognise the permanent physical or psychological injuries that were caused by Troubles-related incidents in the UK or Europe between the 1st of January 1966 and the 12th of April 2010. The financial support on offer can range from £2,000 to £10,000 per year and is determined by the level of permanent disablement. Living with a permanent disablement can have a huge impact on family and loved ones, as they often take on round-the-clock caring roles. The scheme recognises that coping with serious injuries can take a financial toll on individuals and their families, and payments can help with costs. There are also welfare officers in support organisations who can provide free advice on the process and help you complete the application form. So please check the board's website today at victimspaymentboard.co.uk and find out if you are eligible to apply. We then provide communication office email address.
Okay, thank you very much. Any suggested amendments? Go ahead, please, Stuart.
No amendment, Chair, but just I think it's excellent that this committee is doing that, but the range of this committee's communications I think is fairly limited. Can we go back to the Executive Office and ask what plans they have in the final year to promote this?
Yeah.
And just, I think it does need a wider promotion to see how many people can be brought into the scheme at the end.
Right, Vice Chair, just to say, when we had the Victims Payment Board up previously, we did write to the department on that, so that correspondence is currently in the system, but we'll check up on where to
but
see
we
where
need
it
to
is.
check up where
Yeah.
that is now.
We're pending an answer on that.
Okay, thank you. Everybody else content?
Yeah, content, Chair. No, it's all very good. I'm just wondering, is this sort of shared and then told to share it abroad by other groups as much as possible, yeah? Or
Yeah, I think I'll just go out. Do you want to talk about the process within the
Just-
Assembly?
to have an idea.
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
the Assembly, with this being a press release, then the Assembly will issue it to local media, and that'll happen in August this year. It will then also go online, and it will also be highlighted by the Assembly's Twitter feed as well. If there are specific either media or outlets that you think it should go to, Harry, then please let us know, and we can certainly pass that on to the communications office. They'll be handling the actual release of it in August. But if there is somewhere that you would like it to be sent to, then please let us know, and we'll
Yeah,
sort that out.
yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank you,
it.
Harry.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're all in agreement there. Okay, so moving on now to our oral briefing with departmental officials on the June monitoring. Members would refer you to pages 55 to 56 of your pack for the clerk's brief and pages 57 to 66 of the pack for the departmental briefing paper. Okay, so we're just going to seek your agreement for Hansard to record this oral evidence session. Okay, everybody's in agreement. Okay, so we're just going to welcome. Okay, so we have got Ronan Murta, who is the Finance Director at the Executive Office, and Paula Shearer, who is Head of Budgeting Branch at TU as well. Okay, so thank you very much for coming back to committee. Very welcome, and for your papers in advance of the meeting. So I'm just wondering, would you like to go ahead and make some opening remarks?
Yes, some brief opening remarks to allow for questions. So many thanks for the opportunity to provide the committee with an update on the financial position for the department, and in particular June monitoring. A written briefing has been provided to the members, which I hope has been helpful, but I'm happy to discuss the detail outlined in the paper. And as usual, if there are any details or questions about operational delivery linked to any of the issues in the paper, which the committee would be interested to receive more detail, I'd be happy to follow that up with written briefing or responses. The briefing provides an update, first of all, on budget 2025-26 outcome since our last attendance on the 26th of March. So in addition to the draft budget position, which we discussed last time, TEO has been provided a further allocation of £1.1 million towards pay pressures. There's been no changes to the earmarked resource DEL funding allocation or to the capital DEL funding allocation. As previously explained, we started the year with a shortfall of £10.1 million against our initially registered resource DEL bids and £2 million against our capital DEL bids. In June monitoring, we've taken the opportunity to revisit our needs and our spending plans, and the briefing paper outlines the bids that ministers have approved for submission. In reassessing the spending plans, the resource DEL bids that were submitted totalled £9.275 million as outlined in the paper. An emphasis continues to be on delivery, so on frontline services and funding, for example, to grassroots projects and groups for EVOG, to additional projects for good relations, to communities in transition with a view to expanding service provision, for North West Development Fund to contribute to the joint initiative between the Executive and the Irish Government to deliver benefits to the cross-border North West region, and to meet our obligations in respect of the new language bodies. And in terms of capital DEL, ministers agreed to the submission of bids in respect of the Truth, Recovery and Language Body leases, both of which are statutory obligation. And in addition, a bid for £0.7 million has been submitted in respect of ending violence against women and girls to address the gap in funding for the Challenge Fund, previously provided through the Small Business Research Initiative. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Have you anything to add at this stage, Paula? No. Okay, thank you very much. So, I think this time last year we were supplied with copies of the bids that went to the Department of Finance, because I remember being critical that where the justifications, almost the description of why extra money was needed, it was very scant in wording. So we were promised that when we received them this year, that there would be more information in terms of why there was such pressures for this additional money. So I'm just wondering why we didn't get copies of the bids.
Well, we've given recent discussions, we've sought to make the presentation of the information as readily available as possible, and to set out clearly in the paper. There was a paper that came from the committee in respect of the bid forms, and there was discussion, I think, with the clerk in terms of whether we needed to provide that as well as the paper. We were conscious we didn't want to overload information, as the same information would be in both. And last time we'd submitted Excel versions of documents, there was a technical issue as well, and their Excel documents.
Okay, so obviously we have a new clerk from last year, so he obviously wouldn't have been privy to that complaint last year, because I think it was in, for example, Communities and Transition, it was, there's good reports of this work and we need to continue it. And I said, well, who's marking whose homework here? So I was concerned at the time around the justification for why the additional money was needed, where the pressures were. And as I say, I remember who it was actually responded and said, oh, we'll make sure that the bids are more populated and that you will get them in a timely manner next year. And that hasn't happened. So I can take it offline, but I'm just want to let you know why I am concerned about this. But just to move on a bit then, so the pressures then within the end of violence against women and girls, and I'm hearing some really good reports of the process that's underway in Belfast City Council. Obviously that would be my council area, and the demand far outstrips the actual number of applications and stuff, and I'm just wondering how you are going to respond to that now and in the future in terms of meeting the demand?
Well, through the June monitoring process,
Yeah.
So it will all be dependent, as I think we've said previously, we can flex, it's all scalable.
Yeah.
So should more money be forthcoming from the centre, we would be in a position to be able to put more money out through the mechanisms that are in place for delivery of ending violence against women and girls. We work closely with the partners through the strategic oversight and the programme delivery boards. So we can feed any opportunities in terms of additional funding back through that mechanism to be able to deliver on the ground, and that has driven the request. So our refreshed request through June monitoring is very much by looking at what's working and where the need is and where the need continues to be, and you quite rightly highlight the programme for government priority.
So just say you're given an extra $1 million or you're bidding, so would that go out almost per capita across the councils, or are you more intimately aware of where there's greater pressure between the different councils?
Money that was allocated so far to the council was on a per capita basis.
Okay.
So I'm not
Well, if you
into
got
the
additional
detail.
money,
I would assume so, but
Okay.
I would have to liaise with colleagues in the business area to firm up on that. Of the bid last time, when we initially looked for an additional 4 million, and it's there or thereabouts. It was 1 million for sectoral support for more groups through the Regional Change Fund, and 3 million for the Local Change Fund in terms of projects on the ground. And I would imagine that it would be reassessed, and if appropriate, that would be the way that it would be allocated.
Okay. Two more questions. The Communities in Transition, the expanding the provision, I think that was your words you just used there, and the gap of 1.4 million. So what is your involvement then in terms of assessing whether there is the need and the justification for additional money? I think we as a committee, some of us on this committee are a wee bit concerned around the output, the impact on the outcome from this money spent. So what is your role in terms of assessing how the provision is expanded?
Well, the business area has brought forward the bid in terms of the assessment of the delivery so far in line with the business case. So it has looked at the areas and the regions, and it's still, as you say, the same continued 8 regions so far, and the evidence and support that they have had, that they were the most ones that were in need. There are other alternative regions and opportunities to expand. It would all be driven by the funding available, so we don't know how much, if any, would be available. So that would need to be brought back to the business area and to ministers in terms of the priorities within the business case as to whether it would allow expansion into other areas or expansion of provision. So I'm not directly involved in that decision at that level. That would be at an operational level within the business area.
I suppose that speaks to my opening remarks there around we would like to see what's in the bids, so we can actually see how you are assessing that there are these pressures. Last one for me. So the Capital Dell there sits at £16.3 million, £14 million has been allocated, and shortfall of 2. And it comes back to this issue around the statutory obligation to provide accommodation, obviously, to our commissioners and other arm's length bodies. But what work is underway in terms of trying to get them to house, cohabit, get into a building, maybe take different offices on different floors to sort of try to cut that in the public purse, because that's quite a percentage of the overall TO budget is spent on the capital.
Well, the capital in totality will cover a capital grant through urban villages and also Ebrington, so it won't just purely be capital in terms of leases, accommodation leases.
Okay.
So it will be far wider than that. I think it's 78 million is urban villages, for example, in terms of the project delivery. So that's capital.
I'm referring maybe to the wording
The
that you've
bids.
used in your submission, and it talks about 1.5 million for the Trust Recovery.
That's purely, so
Yes.
that's purely the bid. So the only bits that we're bidding for is £2 million, primarily for the leases.
Yes.
So they're the only bits that are left. We didn't get those in the initial allocations at the start of the year. So that is purely to do with the developments in terms of the creation of the new language bodies and
Okay.
for truth recovery. So yes,
The question
in
is
creating,
really about how are you going to cut costs in terms of accommodation?
well, everything in terms of the creation of the language bodies is being brought forward and scrutinised in terms of efficiencies of scale, and if there's opportunities for co-locating or the most efficient use, we would be looking at the estate property in terms of NICS and the most pragmatic and optimum way for value for money
And
of location.
how, as a committee, can we see those options that are being looked at and assure ourselves that, around the veracity of those processes?
Business cases will be prepared looking at various different options about where they could relocate, and the best value for money option will be chosen. But those are still in progress at the minute.
Yeah, but do we see those? Do they come before committee? Or is that
I'm
just
not
for
aware-
ministers?
I'm not aware of business cases coming to the committee. Apologies, I'd need to take that away.
Okay, go ahead, Deputy Chair. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. Thank you for the information which you brought. Just a couple of questions, and they're perhaps more broad-ranging, but basically on similar themes to that which the Chair has raised. Just in terms of the overall budget and the value for money that it presents, how are individual programmes assessed and monitored in terms of the business case, and then what the outcomes are, and how are the outcomes measured against the business case that was delivered in the first place? And is that done on a programme by programme basis? But I also have a concern that as a total budget, the Executive Office needs to be looking across all of those areas and projects that it funds or has a financial interest in, to ensure that in totality the Executive Office is getting value for money for the work that it's doing.
In terms of each programme will be applying best practice in terms of governance and arrangements in terms of its establishments, as we said, in terms of business case, and making the case to deliver the programme in the first place.
Who's best practice? Theirs or a civil service wide best practice?
Civil service wide. So essentially, in terms of the outcomes, in terms of delivery, the department has its KPIs and its business plan that will be set out and agreed with ministers in terms of the priorities and objectives to align to the programme for government, and the outcomes against those in terms of doing assessments with gateway reviews and feedback on assessing the outcomes that have been delivered from those programmes will be benchmarked against those KPIs and assessed as to whether it's been effective. In terms of governance arrangements, along with the business case process, there's post-project evaluations conducted, so there is an ongoing review at all cases in terms of assessing the delivery of programme and how it's doing. In terms of looking forward, in terms of strategic planning, yes, the department does always seek to find optimum ways and better ways of doing things, and we will be working not only within but also wider, working with other departments in terms of the Test and Learn initiative, and finding areas of mutual delivery or opportunities for synergies, both with departments and also with communities in terms of delivering best value.
And how is that individual programme and that executive-wide value for money use of the Executive Office's budget, how's that assessed, and who is it ultimately presented to? And a bit like the questions the Chair asked, I see no reason at all why in a public sector body we should not see the business cases, and I think we also need to see the outturns of those business cases. Have they actually done what it said on the tin when the people came to you and made their pitches?
In terms of assessing value for money, we are, just to add to that, in terms of the governance piece, we're subject to internal audit and external audit, not only financial audit but also value for money review. So there will be external scrutiny as well, and in terms of how we're engaging.
And this will be a rolling programme. So presumably reports are written mid, and then as bids come for additional funds, and at the end of a particular project or at the end of a financial year. Where can we see that information?
That would be into the strategic planning side, the business planning. That would be colleagues in corporate services would handle that side of it in terms of mapping and tracking against delivery in terms of the corporate plans and business plans.
And we can see that? Where?
Yes.
Where can we see that?
Well, those are reported. They're not available online, as far as I were aware. They were published online. Yeah.
You think they are available?
I can check that.
Okay, it'd be useful to know if they are available online. And again, to go back to the point that the Chair makes, it's difficult for this committee to assess how the department is performing, or indeed how it's performing under its various areas of responsibility, if we too cannot see those business cases.
And business areas will carry out evaluations of the programmes that have been delivered and use lessons learned from those programmes to see where best to put the money when they're bidding for money in the next monitoring round in the next year. So they do use the outcomes of previous programmes.
But at that stage it's too late. The money's already been spent. If you've got it wrong, or if it hasn't presented value for money, or it hasn't done what it was intended to do.
And if that's the case, then they look to where they can put the money in a different place that has better value for money. So they wouldn't. It's not like they keep putting the same money in the same area if it's not delivering better or good outcomes. That forces them then to look to see where best could they put the money.
I think the concern the committee has, or at least some members of the committee have, is that that's exactly the situation, and we do have concerns that there isn't best value for money, that there isn't the best outcomes being delivered through various programmes which you have. And unless we can have an underneath look at that, all we can do, and this is unfair on you, all we can do is sit back at the end of a project and criticise. We would far rather be engaged and ask how, what, when, where and why things have happened along the way.
Well, I would just interject at that point and say, well, it is done on an annual basis in the annual report and accounts that are published documents. So we're just in the throes of producing that, which will include transparent and open narrative in terms of what's been delivered in the last year.
I think that part of the Deputy Chair's frustration is one that the amount of times we will say, when was the last time an evaluation report for such and such programme was out, and they say, well, we're in the middle of reviewing this and this will form part of this new strategy. I mean, it would just take you 10 minutes to go down the AQWs to see how frustrating it is for us to try and get those evaluation reports that you have spoken about, because they probably do happen, but when you ask for them, we can never quite get the response from the minister. So, but that's in terms of them to sign those AQWs off.
Chair, thank you. That's been a useful interchange. Hopefully you'll take some of this message back, and I think what would be useful to us is if you not just take it back and discuss it and digest it internally, but you look at better ways of reporting that information to us.
Okay, thank you. Carol, please.
Thank you. Thank you for being at the committee today. So for some months now I've been asking about the cost of the Strategic Investment Board staff operating the Violence Against Women and Girls, and I got an AQW answered. So from 2001 until 2005 it's cost £811,367. So that's just on SIB staff. And the AQW did say that would be reduced for the years 2025 to 26. So I would like to see what the figures are now that the June monitoring round for 25, 26. But given that amount of money and given the struggle that the groups in the community and voluntary sector have had, I just want to put it in record, I think that's quite disgraceful. So in other part of the paper we got from you, it said that 1 million or 1.95 million was spent on good relations. Exactly what was that spent on?
I mean, just to take your point on the SIB and EVOG, as EVOG is now moving into the implementation stage, and the team that are sorry into the delivery has moved on from the delivery stage, and they're taken an opportunity to review their staffing structure and support arrangements needed effectively to deliver the work. So there'll be less reliance on SIB from 25-26 onwards.
Yeah, I think we've provided the detail. Hopefully that.
No, I know, but the unjust approach to this, because the community and voluntary sector experts were used to help develop a strategy at a fraction of the cost and struggled to pay wages and worked very closely with SIB. And when you compare what the salaries of the people who helped SIB with the strategy were compared to those of SIB, they are grossly unequal. So I'm not making the point for the sake of it. I am saying that when it comes to value for money, that will never be challenged unless mutual respect and appreciation for expertise within the community and voluntary sector are accepted. I'm not talking about doing work on the cheap, far from it. But I think there is an ethos and a value that needs to be placed on that work, because I think the money that I spent up until now, given that relationship, there's a lot of inequality there, and I think we need to look at that going forward. So in terms of the 1.95 million...
Sorry, good relations, 1.95 million.
So break that down for me, please.
1.95 million isn't spent to date. That's the bid that we've put in.
To do what?
So essentially it's going to be allocated across central and district good relations. So it's going to essentially, in terms of the central good relations fund, allow more money to be able to be put out to the voluntary and community groups.
So is that the Community Relations Council?
No, not specifically. They're for individual projects that have applied to the Central Good Relations Fund. There's 220 applications seeking funding of 7.1 million, so it's very much oversubscribed. So there's a list of projects that are. I don't want to seem as if I'm trying to fancy food here. I want to know the money that's been spent in the Good Relations Council. I want a breakdown of that money that's going to the Central Good Relations Fund. And I'm assuming the councils, that goes to local councils as well? There would be an equal amount to go to council. So there's the Central Good Relations and the District Good Relations.
So who administers the Central Good Relations Fund?
The Central Good Relations is essentially the money that goes directly out to the projects. And
that goes from TEO to the projects?
Yeah, and the District Good Relations is funding activity in the councils.
Which goes from TEO to councils? So can you give me the figure for the Good Relations Council, because I'm beginning to wonder what they're doing?
It's 975 as well. The bids that 975 for Central Good Relations and 975 for District Good Relations.
Yeah, it's 50-50 the bid.
No, but this is for the Community Relations Council.
That's different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you could come back with that, and then
we'll bid in for that one though in June monitoring.
Okay, but there's an annual.
Oh yeah, they're getting the bus line. Yeah.
Yeah, because so it's part of an NDP. Yeah. Okay. So how many of the ALB's NDPs are the department funding annually? 8. So could we get a breakdown for each of those as well, please? Because it just says NDP.
DPVs. So in terms of breaking down the June monitoring bid into how much for each?
Both. So it's the annual fund that they get, and then what they're getting on top of the June month, because all the NDBPs and ALBs didn't get their full allocation the last time. because of the budget situation.
We were able to put an extra million.
I seen that.
Everyone got their opening baseline, but we were able to put an extra million in across all 8 NDPBs to cover pay pressures.
I seen that. So does that cover them all? Is it just for pay pressures?
Mostly pay pressures.
Okay.
We understand there's going to be further funding through national insurance contributions. DOF have advised that we're getting 300k towards national insurance contributions, and we're going to share that between the department and the NDPBs.
Okay, so see, to go back to the money going to district councils on entering violence against women and girls. So that's, you said that was done on a pro rata basis, was it? Per capita, thanks Paula.
Council areas, yeah.
So the reason I'm asking is because the population in Belfast is greater than elsewhere. Is it receiving the same amount of money that, for example, Causeway Coast and Glens would receive?
It'll receive more.
It was.
Yeah.
It would receive more, okay. And then, see in terms, so is the Entering Violence Against Women and Girls is a standalone, on its own standalone programme. Mm-hmm. It's not contingent on good relations or anything else. Okay. Okay. And then the last one I have is on the North West Development Fund. So it says a bid for 0.42 million has been brought forward to contribute to the joint initiative between the Executive and the Irish Government. Where's that sitting?
The bid has been reviewed. Ministers have agreed a bid for 150,000 to go in.
Okay,
It was revised to that amount because ministers' preference was to help shift to more of a focus of coordinating the strategic interventions within the programme using existing mechanisms that are in place.
Okay, and in terms of the Irish Government contribution, what was it?
It was a... let's see. Apologies.
I don't think we know the current funding for this year. I know previously.
They may have just put down a flat amount of money.
December 2024, they provided a commitment to provide, current year included €122,000.
And have they done that?
It said that was specifically to support the continuation of the Secretariat structures for 18 months. So I assume, that was done in December.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Brian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ronan and Paula. In your paper, there are some indications where Department of Finance has already made commitments from the June monitoring rounds of allocations. In terms of all the other bids, will an outcome be known at one time, or will it become a rolling programme? Will there be a definitive outcome at a certain date?
The items that are known through June monitoring are the ones that are coming directly from Treasury that DOF are aware of, I think it's fair to say. So it will be the likes of the national insurance contribution that was received.
The CIT, the original money for CIT, and for Windsor Framework. That will be allocated through June monitoring. So we know we're definitely getting those 3 allocations. What we don't know is the outcome of the bids of the 9.2 million that we've put forward and the capital bids.
And that's a process that's ongoing at the moment, and we don't know the outcome of that as yet. I would imagine there will be very large demands on the block.
So there is no indicative date for the outcome of June monitoring?
I would imagine that we should know that shortly. I believe there's a paper with the Finance Minister at the moment, but we don't have an indication of a date as yet.
But it should be all announced at once rather than become like a rolling programme of allocations. Yeah. Okay.
It would require Department of Finance. I would have thought the Finance Minister would bring a paper to the Executive, and would have thought if that's pre-summer recess, that would need to be before the end of next week.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the non-departmental public bodies, again, I mean, they had what are called pay and inflationary pressures, and in the budget process, only half of their needs approximately were met. How much does the department monitor the outworking of that? That if not all of the pay pressures were met, and of course every need is a valid need, but if not all the pay pressures are met, can those bodies make allocations and take can the impact be felt in their programmes? How much influence and scrutiny does the department have on those financial decisions made by the non-departmental bodies?
The department works closely in partnership with all its NDPBs, and we have partnership agreements with them, and there is partnership teams within the department responsible for working closely with each of the bodies. So they'll work with them in terms of their management of their budget. Ultimately, each of the NDPBs has its own accounting officer that ultimately has responsibility for their budget. But if there were any proposals in terms of how they're going to perhaps seek to veer between lines, or move budget, or to manage that position, the department will work closely with them on that. But ultimately, I think it's fair to say, both for the department and for the NDBBs, the budget position, like for all, like with all other departments, it involves tough decisions. There's vacancies that aren't being filled, and there is an impact in terms of what can be done and when it can be done.
Yeah. It's just my concern is that there shouldn't be decisions made which would radically change the outputs, and outcomes from their work. Deciding to satisfy one particular pressure and cut, programme costs. So, in terms of the consequences for outputs and outcomes, the department would be monitoring that.
Yes, absolutely, and it is very much based on that very thing. It's about the statutory obligations of the bodies and the outputs and outcomes that are required.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one other area of question, Chair. In terms of the Good Relations funding, there's an unmet need there, a substantial unmet need. Again, given recent events, and in a context where increased immigration and populations is not felt evenly across society, and some areas feel those pressures more than others, and I have argued that there needs to be a greater focus on community cohesion and listening to communities, listening to their concerns, addressing needs, and supporting community cohesions in areas that are most impacted by increased immigration. Is there an element of that? I mean, I know that this is a financial report, but are you aware of that being a priority in the allocations to Good Relations?
Well, certainly in terms of the management of Good Relations and oversight, it would be the colleagues responsible for that area would be able to speak better to the detail in terms of the geographical allocations and the pinpointing of need and the direction of resources. We will take it at June monitoring level and departmental level as to what the requirement is, as opposed to getting into the specifics. That would be a matter for them. Apologies. We could come back to you with more detail if that would be helpful. I appreciate
I am asking about the programme, but it is, we have had a traditional view of Good Relations in terms of our Northern Ireland circumstances, but I do think that that community cohesion between involving immigrant communities, newcomer communities, and Indigenous communities, and it's not the issues are not even across society, and in some areas there's little impact, and other areas, particularly with lower value private housing, and where you get more private rentals, there is a greater impact. It's an issue I'll continue to raise, that the funding needs to be applied to those areas.
Well, it certainly forms part of Good Relations going forward in the review of the TBUC strategy and the refugee integration strategy. All of that comes together in terms of, yes, absolutely, the change in landscape. It is no longer maybe the historical Good Relations of the two traditional communities, but it is far wider than that now, and it is about being a more diverse society and about the relationship between all the people in the area.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Timothy, please.
Thanks very much. I suppose an easy one to start off with. National insurance contributions. Talks about in your paper of a pressure of £1 million. Department of Finance has indicated an allocation of 0.3 million to be made to TO towards the pressure. So my understanding was that there was 146 million was given to the executive to offset the national insurance contributions. Yes, there was a shortfall. I think it was pressures approximately of 207 million. But if you look what was given, it's over 70% of the national insurance contributions were provided to the executive. And you're saying here that there's potentially 700,000 of a shortfall. You bid for 300,000.
We bid in total. We registered a need across ourselves and the ALBs of 1 million, and we're being allocated 300,000. So there's a 700,000 shortfall. So we have bid for that amount again in June monitoring.
Yeah. Is there not a case to be made that Westminster's already provided over 700,000 of that allocation essentially for TEO?
Well, I suppose that's a matter for allocations beyond the department. That's not within our gift to reach out to the total, I suppose. Oh.
But I just find it bizarre that when that money has been given for this purpose, that you're sitting here and you're having to go to a June monitoring round to try and make up a 700,000 shortfall. I've said for a long time that what the money comes from Whitehall, from Westminster, over to the executive should go on that purpose. That's creating a pressure within the department. It's creating a shortfall within the department. Everybody needs their wages paid. So surely that should have been a priority, which is something that concerns me.
I suppose it's whether it's hypothecated or unhypothecated when it comes across. Apologies, I don't have that detail with me in terms of the executive papers that were issued at the time in terms of the allocation.
The non-earmarked resource,
Yep.
salaries, 1.1 million of that met. It says the June monitoring round 700,000. So what sort of salaries are you trying to get that there's a shortfall on?
Well, that shortfall, that's the employer's national insurance.
That's what that figure is.
700,000.
I find it absolutely bizarre that when you get money from Westminster for something as basic as people's pay, that you're having to sit there and absorb that as potentially a pressure, while there's money for photographs, while there's money for everything else. But wages should come first, because that's something that won't change. Essentially, people need to pay to do their job. HIA, so there's 150 million ring fenced. Have we any idea yet of any money coming from the religious orders or organisations?
No, HIA will be part of the 150 million. The 150 million is the pool.
Truth Recovery and Victims.
Yeah, absolutely. So the contributions in terms of the HIA, the negotiations continue with the institutions. So
we're told that they were coming to an end maybe 8 months ago. Is there no word of that, process being completed? The question is, when that money comes in, will that come to TEO or will that go into the executive pot?
It comes to TEO, and we are permitted, the agreement is with the Department of Finance that we return that, and it is offset within the pool against the overall pressure. Reason being that the executive has made sure the victims aren't disadvantaged in any way, and they didn't have to wait for any money coming in from elsewhere. So they've been paid that money. So whenever the money comes in, it is allocated to the pool.
Yeah, the pool is in TEO.
Yeah.
So essentially, once we receive money from the religious orders, and because of the appalling way that this has been outplayed, that we haven't got any money up front, we're having to absorb this as pressures. And meanwhile, that money could be used for ending violence against women and girls, communities in transition, the salaries. Would that be a fair comment? Or other projects deemed appropriate within TEO?
When it comes in, it's earmarked. Any of the allocations and equally any of those contributions are all earmarked and can't be used for any other purpose. That's from a budgeting perspective and fiscal rules perspective. That's
if you have 150 million that's been provided for HIA Victims Truth Recovery, the contributions comes in, which offsets some of the money that was earmarked for that. Surely that money can be freed up to be used in other things within TEO.
We can't. We can't use any easements within the earmarked pool and divert it towards non-earmarked areas. So we couldn't, if we had an underspend on the earmarked pool, we can't take that money and put it towards EVOG, for example.
Where does that money go then if there's an underspend?
It would go back to the centre, to the Department of Finance, and presumably then the executive would consider that along with any other underspends in terms of departmental pressures across the service.
But surely there's an incentive to go after this money for the bigger budget. Would that be a fair comment?
It's the negotiations are ongoing in terms of seeking that contribution for the victims and in terms of public funds.
Yeah, just before you go on, Timothy, I think that maybe we'll take it down as an action to write to the department, ask for an update on the work of the independent facilitator, because it's been quite a while since we've heard. So,
Windsor framework, so this is Treasury earmarked 2.17 million. Over the last number of weeks and months, there's been a number of witnesses that have come in front of the committee, basically downplayed, there's no divergence, there's no issues, but yet we see that there's 2.17 million coming to the executive, coming to TEO. What's that money being spent on?
Well, we bid for 2.17 million, but we've actually been advised that we've got 1.5 million in resource and 0.15 in capital. In terms of the resource, there's nearly 200k of it goes towards ULITs and the team to support ULITs. And ULITs, as you know, is it administers the EU legislation. Sorry, apologies. The ULITs is on the NICS internet to aid NICS departments in monitoring EU legislation that falls within the scope of the Windsor framework. So some of the funding goes for that, and we've had funding for that for the past few years. And in fact, we've just been advised that funding is going to continue for the next 3 years, because we've been advised of our funding for the next 3 years for Windsor framework.
Is that paying staff?
No, 140k of it's for the actual ULITs system, and 40k of it's for staff.
That's nowhere near 2 million.
There is 1.1 for the dedicated mechanism, and then we also have another nearly 200k for staffing on who look after Windsor Framework Article 2 within the department.
So it's clear you have come today with additional information to respond to questions. Surely some of that stuff's basic and should have been provided up front, no? As part of the briefing paper. Like, you have a figure in here for 2.17 for the Windsor framework. You've broken it down into what we're getting through this way and that way. Surely that's a cost or a breakdown that could have been in the papers, no?
I suppose we didn't provide that information because we didn't bid for it through June monitoring. It comes through a different monitoring exercise, so it wasn't part of the official June monitoring.
But if that's something going forward that you want more detail in the paper, probably if we have a catch up with the clerk and go through just the information that you'd be seeking in terms of presentation, we can look at that going forward.
So, communities in transition, 1.4 million. This is a real bugbear of mine, real bugbear of a number of members in the committee. That we've been told this is phase 3 we're coming into. Phase 1 and phase 2, and this is rehearsing old ground, but phase 1 and phase 2 is based on 2016 data. I'm guessing this 1.4 million, yes, I think there's a shortfall in the 25-26 budget, but we're depending on getting additional money to move this to new areas, while the existing 2016 figures are prioritising the old areas, even though we have new figures which would show that this programme should move. Is that a fair comment?
No, the EPOC peer review, which was refreshed in September 2024, still highlighted those same areas as being the most impacted. So it's not that they were saying that those weren't areas where there shouldn't be investment or activity.
So, we have plundered millions into communities, and the strap line is, when does a community in transition become transitioned? And what you're just after telling me is, our figures show that in 2024, that's made no difference. Them are still the same areas that need the money to transition.
Well, I'm not in possession of the analysis, so I couldn't possibly agree that it makes no difference.
But you said the 2024 figures.
But saying that, I think there's a distinction between saying that it's still the most, the priority areas, compared to it made no difference. I think are I think there's two different statements in that.
After pouring millions into communities and you're saying they're still the priority areas, if you want to dance the head of a pin, by all means, go on ahead, but that's the way my interpretation is from this side. Phase 1, Phase 2, we were told we have new data which should look at new areas, but you're just after telling me that Phase 3, the data from 8 years after,
9
years, yeah,
No.
tells us that we still should be concentrating in the same areas. I've done an AQW looking at who's been getting this money. It's basically the same people, time and time again, has been getting this money to deliver projects in these same areas. To me, that blows my mind. The Paramilitary Crime Task Force has been very active in North Antrim over this last number of years, between drugs and different feuds and different offences. My community is crying out for interventions, for community mobilisation, essentially, to form community groups and move past what they've had and what they've been subject to for years. Where does that come into the equation?
All I can say is that in terms of the next phase, it's been, as we were saying earlier on, subject to business case and evidence based on evidence that's been brought forward in terms of that review. Getting beyond that, you're into, I think, the delivery, the more detailed delivery area.
I'll move on. That blows my mind that you're telling me 2024 data shows that we still have to target the same areas. Like there's something fundamentally wrong with our process.
It's highlighting those areas, but not just those areas.
Well,
so that hence we
there
need
is,
more money to. That's the point. That's
I'll
the
continue
point.
to fund the paramilitary groups that's in them areas that's been getting money off us in Phase 1 and Phase 2. I'm lost for words. We'll move on to ending violence against women
I
and
don't
girls.
think the money's going to paramilitaries.
Well, some that would
It's
be
money towards delivery on the
be careful
ground.
that.
Yes.
There's some groups that are doing good work, yes, but there's some groups that have applied time and time again, and there's no incentive to move on past what we've had for years. There's no incentive to change. There's no incentive to transition if you're going to still continue to fund the same areas. Ending violence against women and girls, if I could move to it. So we've heard that if we get additional money, there'll be more money going to councils. I have serious concerns about how TEO operates, whether it's good relations or whether it's ending violence against women and girls, that continually, instead of us running the programmes, we ship a lot of this out, like subcontract it out to local councils. And it seems to be a given that if we get money in June monitoring, that's where it's destined to go. Can you turn around and tell us today where all the money has went that was given to councils in the first tranche? Because as a committee, we have wrote to all the councils. A number of them have come back and told us what the money has went on. A number of them are still outstanding. And there's one of them, it's in my own area, came back and didn't give any details of how they've awarded the money out. Now, there's a lot of great organisations, and I'm not taking away or diminishing that. But I can't see how we can turn around and say this is great use of money when we don't know where all the money has spent. And the correspondence from last week, and this is from Fermanagh, Anoma Council. As the full budget of 85,500 was not fully allocated, the council is in discussion with TEO to determine the most appropriate use of the remaining £16,266. So there we have a council, hasn't spent all its money, is in discussion with TEO of the best use of that money going forward. And what you're telling us here today is that when this money comes in, that'll be more of it will be shipped out to councils.
I don't think that was the answer you gave me. I think it was more you would then it would be the engagement then to see where there are pressures, because as I said, Belfast's heavily oversubscribed.
In terms of the governance, we work closely with the councils, but also with other parties involved, other departments, PSNI, etc. I mean, the governance arrangements include oversight by the ministers, by the junior ministers, there's the strategic board and then the programme oversight board, and all that involves constant engagement and scrutiny in partnership with the councils and with the departments to determine the best use and the best delivery for the programme.
Has there been clear themes and criteria set out for councils?
I don't have that detail with me as part of June monitoring.
Well, that's certainly not something that's come through from the feedback from councils. If there is, I would love to see it. That these are the themes the Executive Office have set out within ending violence against women and girls. This is the criteria for those being awarded. This is different pay bands. That's certainly something that hasn't come through. But where that is leading to, I would like to make a plea that if there is money comes in a pilot or for the June monitoring round, that the TO consider using a pilot. So in Ballymena, what we've had and what we've experienced over the last number of months is an increase in sexual assaults. We've seen a lot of violence has poured onto our streets as an outworking of that. I met a group of ladies last week who would love to run a pilot project for a 12-week to try and do something that will actually make a massive difference on the ground in Ballymena about ending violence against women and girls. There's an element of this is the strategy, ending violence against women and girls. But the bigger piece that seems to be missing out of that is how do we bring in the integration from those that have come in from other countries into the town. So I think there's a massive opportunity here for the Executive Office to take a slight step back instead of pushing the money straight out to councils and saying, there you go, we have ticked the box, we have spent the money to deliver our flagship strategy. I think there needs to be a different approach.
Against women and girls by burning them out. How ironic. That's what just done Ballymena.
Oh, hold on here, Matt. I'm not talking violence is wrong, and you've heard me talk about it time and time again. I've said time and time again the violence was wrong. The ladies and the people that were protesting that night in the car park to raise concerns that exist within my area, that there was nothing racist about them. They were raising legitimate concerns, and to downplay that is part of the problem, Carl. That you're just labelling everybody that was there in the car park.
I've no doubt those women didn't burn people out. I've no doubt they didn't.
Well, then why would you introduce that to the conversation?
Because I think it's ironic.
There's two separate things.
I think
the violence was wrong.
I think it's worth having this conversation, but Carol, will you finish and then Timothy will let you back in.
I think it's ironic when you're questioning money going to end violence against women and girls and not address what happened in your own town. It's not neither or, it has to be both.
I've said numerous times, I have said in this committee that violence is wrong. My party can say that. That's always been our position. My party takes a zero violence attitude. Can your party say the same? There's always been an alternative to the violence that we've seen in this country. There's an alternative to the violence in Ballymena. There's an alternative to the violence in Northern Ireland 50 years ago.
Hold on, please.
Unfortunately, your party can't say the same.
I'm speaking. I'll bring in the second Deputy Chair. I'm very conscious that the two departmental officials, we have gone way off topic here in terms of why they came to talk to us today around the finances. So have you any further questions in terms of finance?
Absolutely. And what I'm trying to encourage is to meet with some of the people on the ground in Ballymena, some of the ones that have been to the protest, and encourage the TEO to consider running a pilot project that will actually make a difference.
Okay, I have a suggestion. Okay, so after we get back from summer recess in September, that will be 12 months from the launch of the strategic framework and ending violence against women and girls, and maybe under our forward work programme, when we're agreeing that, then we could maybe ask departmental officials who will have those answers in terms of delivery, evaluation, etc. We could ask them to come back. Okay. Deputy Chair, did you have anything you wanted to say?
It was just a general comment, but it has a financial backing to it. It is ironic that Mid and East Antrim Council refused to accept £100,000 of funding, which could have, if it had been used properly and sensitively and effectively on the ground in the Ballymena, would have funded the groups that the member is talking about. But he's the member who voted against taking the money when he was a member of that local authority.
That was for resettling, Stuart. Be clear about what you're talking about.
Well, you were mixing the two subjects up in your last sentence. You were talking...
No.
Yes, you were. Yes, you were. You were mixing the two issues up in the last sentence. But the issue is that when it comes to money, I think TEO has a clear responsibility not only for all of the funds which it delivers, but which it delivers on behalf of central government and others to ensure that it is used on the ground. It goes back to my point about how these projects are evaluated. And if a local authority decides not to take the money, then I think you need to step in and deliver those programmes yourselves over their heads.
Okay, I think we've maybe run out of road in terms of the questions that are relate to the June monitoring round. So I'm just going to end this section.
Or just a
sorry,
quick
go
one.
ahead, please. Arnie, you haven't
it's just
spoken
off the
yet.
back of Timothy's query there about unspent money being allocated. Money being allocated to councils in relation to EVOG. Will that unspent allocation, particularly speaking in relation to Fermanagh District Council, will that be reprofiled? And in terms of the funding tiers, how were they actually designed? To say there's 3 different funding tiers. Were each of those tiers capped?
In terms of the grants available,
Yeah.
it would have been part.
Or for organisations or ALBs to actually apply?
I need to come back to you in terms of the detail, in terms of the application of the scheme. What I would say in terms of the funding for ending violence against women and girls, particularly with regard to the additional amount that we received, it was earmarked. So any money that would be unspent in terms of earmarked funds, we would seek to see if that could be reused within the programme. We'd want to be making the best use of scarce resources that we do receive on an earmarked basis for our programmes.
Okay.
And just again, Chair, if
That's fine,
you'll
sorry,
indulge
you haven't
me,
indicated, that's fine.
just in relation to the North West Development Fund, obviously there has been a shift now to focus on more strategic interventions. Has there been any discussions as of yet as to what some of those interventions may be?
No, I don't have any detail I think on that. No, we don't have that detail. We could come back to you.
Okay, thank you. Carol, I think you have a supplementary you want to come back on, and then I'll bring you in, Sinead,
It
after.
was just the Homes for Ukraine, 1.5 million. Is that scheme still going on?
Homes for Ukraine. Yes.
Still proceeding, yeah. We get money from Westminster for that.
Is it just for Ukrainian people?
No, it's Homes for Ukraine is yes, but there's other schemes that we have with full dispersal. There's Syrian scheme, Afghan scheme, there's other ones, but and we get money from Westminster in January for that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And, sorry, does that go? Is that for private landlords?
I think some host families
No, it's
receive them as well.
family project.
Just for the
Yeah.
host families?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I need clarification, but I do know that some host families.
Yeah, I know host families as well that are continuing on.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sinead, please.
Thank you. Most of the questions have been actually answered at this stage and gone through thoroughly. I think it's unfair for us to put the officers in the position that we're kind of putting them and asking them about the strategic direction for some of the funding, because quite obviously Roland and Paula are not able to tell us just exactly what they are. But also I do think it's legitimate for members of the committee to be concerned when monitoring funds are made available and we really don't know what the strategic thinking behind those allocations and where they're going and why they're going, and sometimes we're unclear about what the outcomes are of those fundings as well. So we probably need others to be able to answer within the department to come back and answer those questions for us, because we're doing everything like in our budgeting almost retrospectively, which is completely inadequate and it's not proper scrutiny at all. We're just kind of going through a process, ticking a box and then hoping for the best, and it's really inadequate, and it makes me always feel really uncomfortable, to be honest. In relation to the North West Development Fund, again, Ronan, I know you can't answer the questions, but what we've seen is that this fund itself has been problematic from the very beginning. The ROI has always stepped up and paid the money up front, and we've waited from the executive office to kind of backfill. And once again, we see that the Irish government has paid it just to maintain the work ongoing, and now we're just paying, you know, less than a third of it. And we're told now that following discussions with the Irish Government and local councils, it's now proposed to slice that funding down as well. And they're looking at other ways to better align the wider investment. You know, I find it incredible that our councils would be saying, don't give us any money. So obviously the money has been cut and we're waiting on other monies to come through. Now, I don't know if it's through the Executive Office, but obviously there's no bids for other money at this point. So I really do think that we need to write and get underneath the skin of what is actually happening here. But the Northwest has had a funding cut, and let's be clear about that.
Well, ministers have agreed the focus of the fund going forward should be on the delivery of the transformational change using the structures in place. So there has been engagement on a cross-border basis, an engagement with the relevant departments and councils and the government. So the engagement is, I suppose, looking forward strategically at using what is in place and the mechanisms that are already there and through the engagement of those structures.
Look, greatest respect, Ronan, I haven't a clue what you're talking about. I don't know what they are because you haven't been able to come, and it's not your fault. You're here to tell us about the budget and about June monitoring, but there's a programme behind here that there's no money coming forward at this particular moment in time, and I don't see any more streams. So essentially what was there is getting a bit funding, but it's back funding for work that has already taken place. So I have no idea where this new strategic alignment to existing programmes, I don't know what that is, and neither obviously do you.
Okay, any final comments? Okay, well, thank you very much again. I think there were a number of items that we will be requesting you to send, but thank you for now. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, members, maybe we'll do a recap on what information we're waiting for. Maybe Clark, could you run through?
Thank you, Chair. There were a number of items there that committee was seeking a bit more information on. Just to run through them all, and please let me know if you think I've missed anything here. But first one was just the options in terms of capital for language bodies, looking at how that could be rationalised and getting a bit more information on that.
Sorry, is that options for accommodation?
Yes, yes. Okay, so capital resource for that. The second one was more general one about value for money and the performance and business cases around how that is actually measured, and what more information the committee could be furnished with, and that covers just about all of the areas that we were talking about. The witnesses talked about annual reports and accounts, but I think also the committee were looking at evaluation reports there, so we will go back to the department on those. In terms of specifically the Strategic Investment Board, Carol, I know that you were asking about again.
So it's from 2005 to 2006.
Yes.
The figures, even if they're estimated at this stage, of what's going to be spent
25 and 26,
on SIB staff working on the strategy.
Yes,
please.
That's okay, no problem, that's fine. Community Relations Council, more of a breakdown of the costs and also the bids that were put in for there. The next one I had was NDPBs, a breakdown of how the due monitoring splits between the 8 different bodies, and then also the annual funding of how they split between the 8 different bodies. There is quite a lot here. The next one, good relations, and in particular community cohesion, looking at the details of any splits of funding that have specifically gone to that, and also a wider breakdown of actions and funding under communities in good relations for the year.
And the Good Relations Council.
And the Good Relations, I've actually got that a little bit lower down. No, that's okay, that's fine. So I'll put that in there anyway, yes. So the work of the Good Relations Council, just give me 1 second, that's fine. The next one was regarding national insurance contributions, and further detail on the allocation from Westminster and how that was actually then distributed. Chair, you had mentioned then getting an update on the work of the independent facilitator as well. We will ask for that. The official had mentioned about having a conversation with myself and the team just about the detail that the committee would require in future. So I'll make sure that happens as well, so that we try and get a lot more of this that clearly they had with them,
Yeah.
but the committee hadn't received.
He knows we like to see the bids.
Yes, and I think there was a conversation previously
appreciate that.
Around that, but it's something that we can revisit with the department as well. And then the only other one I had, I don't think any other actual action points.
Sorry, the only other thing, just to go back to
Yeah.
the very top one there, and that was around the truth recovery as well. It was not just the language bodies,
Right.
but it's also the truth recovery inquiry team.
Okay, that's
Go ahead, please,
I
Harry.
was just saying, maybe in the back of what Carol said, the homes for Ukraine,
Yeah.
could we maybe have more of a breakdown how that money's spent?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Would that be
Harry.
okay, Carol?
Oh God, if it's for sponsoring families and supporting,
Yes, just to know, what
how many there is, because I mean, they're still under threat and they can't go home.
Yeah, so it's just be nice to know.
There may be some money for other integration, like training or language. You
Yes.
know, you just don't know, but it'd be good to get that.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
good idea.
you.
That's fine.
Community for Transition, we've heard again about the 2024 figures that apparently back up the phase 1 and phase 2 areas. At what point can we see this?
I know that we've already
Asked about
written
it,
to the
yeah?
department on that. Yeah, we'll just check. I don't think we've had.
If we're sending a list of
response.
queries off the back of this, it'd probably be useful to keep
Put it in again.
highlighting it.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry, Claire, there's just one action just about add any violence against women and girls to the forward work programme.
Oh, yes,
September to
yes.
December
Yes.
session.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, members, going to move on then. So our next session was meant to be an oral briefing from the First Minister, Deputy First Minister and the two junior ministers. So unfortunately, due to illness, that has had to be rescheduled to the Wednesday the 10th of September. And just like to send our best wishes to the First Minister on a speedy recovery. I suppose one of the issues that they were to come to speak to us about was the the introduction and second stage of the public inquiry and redress scheme into mother and baby institutions, and I just wondered if we wanted to take a minute just to reflect on what happened in the debate yesterday, what the key issues were. We've all received overnight in the last 24 hours a lot of correspondence from people just sort of highlighting concerns. Just wanted to know if anybody wanted to speak to that. Go ahead, please.
I think we're all agreed that the institutions, regardless who they are, need to pay. I mean, I think we're all agreed on that. So there was a solid action asking for legal advice around compellability. I also think we've all got big difficulties with the posthumous.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that was very, very clear. It just seems so cruel. But I do think I know we're not going to really do this until September, but even just at this stage, even some of the commentary yesterday, I mean, there are issues for me, around the ability of anyone to give evidence and protected evidence, like a public immunity type setup.
Yeah.
Now I appreciate, and I made the difference yesterday, survivors and victims should absolutely have that flexibility because they've got an Article 8 right, but no one from any institution should not be afforded that. And we may need to further, just to ask the department, because we raised this with the officials last week.
Yeah.
I think it's clauses 14, 15 and something from yesterday. But we raised this last week with the officials when they were in. Are they going to amend it themselves? Because I would like us to consider if we're agreed.
Yeah.
It's just that I just think it would fly in the face of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Now an inquiry may feel different without 10 inquiry chair or panel, whatever the complexion is. But it's just the idea of not facing those people on behalf of the institution. I just don't think can do that.
There's one grey area in that, and that is the potential for someone who is who will have a background from an institution,
Whistleblower?
but may wish to come forward as a whistleblower.
Oh, I said that yesterday.
You did, okay, just to make sure
So,
that
yeah.
I understand entirely victims have to be totally protected.
Anybody even coming forward
and
as a
you're right to
whistleblower.
say
Okay,
that
all the time.
you're putting public exposure for the institutions, but it may just be that there will be the odd whistleblower in the middle of all of that, and they need to be protected as well.
Okay, so I'm wondering then, so that around the public interest immunity application, etc. Deputy Chair, please. I'm just wondering, because we know this is going to be an issue, I wonder, is that another area that we should get legal advice on over the summer?
Yeah.
Sure.
Could we add that to the list? Is that we in agreement? Okay.
There's just one other issue in relation to just as a follow-up from yesterday. You made reference to the fact that some of us have received correspondence. I'm sure most people have been copied into the same emails.
The workhouses.
We're not quite sure about workhouses, but I've got a couple of individuals. I don't want to go back to them and say, you can come forward and all of that. I would rather that was done on an official basis by the committee. So if it's okay, what I would like to do is forward these to the clerk, to the committee, and so that the person gets a formal response setting out exactly the process and what will happen. Even though they may have heard all of this from others, but I just feel that I want to get them off my email inbox and to somewhere where I know they will get a very clear response.
I suppose I went back to a couple and asked for their permission to forward them, but the clerk and the assistant clerk, we had a conversation about this morning around the fact that people have spent a lot of time emailing us, providing us with their personal information, and for us then to go back and say, actually, can you regurgitate this into another form? No. But there are. Do you want to speak to that then? I'll bring you in afterwards, Brian.
Yeah, Chair. I fully understand the issue that you raise. The Assembly as a whole uses citizen space as its consultative vehicle as such, and that is the only way in which we can capture evidence that can then be used for the committee stage. Anything that is emailed independently or emailed even to the inbox for the committee, unless it's come through the citizen space portal, is something that we can't actually use. However, there are ways in which we can help people access that, including, and Chair, as you said earlier on, there will be people who aren't online, who don't necessarily have access to that. We can provide hard copies of the consultation for them to fill in. Unfortunately, there isn't really a way around that. There are certainly, so I'm more than happy for you to forward on emails that you've had to ourselves, and we will then point them to
that's all I want you to do.
The consultation, which hasn't
no,
launched
do
yet.
That.
But
I'm not asking you to
no,
do
no, that's fine. But we are a little bit, our hands are tied a little in terms of what we can actually do with that information if it hasn't come through.
Oh, no, that's okay.
The correct portal as such.
Okay, but I think that we need to make sure the call for evidence isn't too laboursome for them, and
that's something we'll discuss next week.
Sorry, can I just bring Brian in first and then Timothy? Thanks.
I spoke to Martin Carey yesterday about the emails that came in, and he said yes, maybe that's what he was referring to. He said that there would be an email address, whatever, or a proper mechanism whereby people can submit their concerns and their views. So
that will launch, Brian. Sorry, we're hoping to have that launched on the 7th of July, the day that we do the familiarisation session, where we've invited stakeholders to come into the building. We will be live by then. It's something that the committee will look at. We'll go through in some detail at next week's meeting as to how that actually works.
Right. Okay. Just because we could all be. I mean, thankfully those people wrote to all of us, and we welcome their communication. But it'd be good to know that there's a formal that we can direct people to then.
I'm happy if any members wish to forward on any emails that they've had at this point, we will then go back to them with relevant wording that points the way to the formal process.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Timothy, please.
If I could just go back to the oral briefing. Obviously it's disappointed that it's been cancelled today. It was for a specific purpose, to deal with the legislation. There was agreement in place that the First and Deputy First Minister and Junior Ministers would come 4 times a year. I would be very keen.
It wasn't necessarily agreement, it was an aspiration.
Aspiration, agreement, whatever. But I think at this stage we should be making it clear that this should be an additional evidence session when they come next year to deal with the issues, the topics that they should have been dealing with today. Disappointed, and we talked before we come into open session about other dates not being available, but I think there needs to be a clear direction from this committee that we'll be expecting an additional evidence session to deal with the topics that were missed today.
Okay, no, that's a fair point. Sarah Ann, I wonder, could you maybe firm up the details around the familiarisation and the two outreach, or go ahead please.
Yeah, so the familiarisation session, so the first one's on the 7th of July here in the Long Gallery at 10 a.m. And then the second session, so I've been sending out the save the dates today, is on the 9th, Tuesday 9th of September in Wave Trauma Centre in their new building.
You had a time but now, don't you?
Yes, so it's from 2 to 4 p.m, Chair. And then the online session will be on Thursday the 11th of September, and that's from 4 p.m, and that'll just be online on Microsoft Teams. So there's the 3 opportunities there for stakeholders to engage with us, and once members send through the details to the clerk about the bill, if they're not on any of those lists, we can obviously let them know about those sessions and they can register to attend.
So what? So in terms of any contributions during any of those sessions, how are they going to be captured that we can use it as evidence for our scrutiny work, or is that not really? Is it more? Are they more for information as opposed to? Okay.
Yeah, they're not. It's not formal committee proceeding.
Okay.
It's more, and actually, it came from the sessions we had in terms of trauma related work, and it's more about trying to give people who may well come into the committee to provide evidence, give them an understanding of how the process works, what the rooms look like, what will happen on the day, and so it's really more about that than it is actually about the bill itself. Although we'll be discussing the bill, it won't really be a forum for us asking for views from individuals at that point.
Okay, and just a final one for me on this. So I had a Zoom meeting with a birth mother and an adult adoptee earlier today, and they were asking me some questions, and I was a bit curious myself, even though I've read the bill a couple of times, and I suppose this is what will happen. Then we will all be asked some questions, and I'm just wondering, is there any way that we could maybe send them through to use, to almost compile a list to send to the TO officials so that we can get a response to come back in September?
And do you mean questions from members of the public on particular clauses of the bill?
Yes.
Yeah, not our questions.
But that's what I mean. But there was just some I thought, actually, right now, if that's...
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
Because obviously people are saying...
Yes.
Again, I would be suggesting, and you'll see for when we get to it, I keep on saying it next week's meeting, but at next week's meeting, the way that the call for evidence will be framed, there will be a number of questions that we will be asking of members of the public to respond to that. Within that, there is the capacity then for them to then put questions regarding particular clauses, in terms of if we ask them their thoughts on particular clauses, they can then ask for more detail or pose questions around that. I think rather than doing it on a more, again, informal basis, it just means that those answers aren't necessarily evidence.
Yes,
Do you see what I mean? I know I realise that sounds obstructive, but there really is a process that we need to go through.
But I suppose in some ways how they respond to questions will be their understanding of what the clause means. And so it's really about what does this clause mean?
And this does come back to, we had previously, the committee had asked the department for an easy read version of the bill, whether that be not necessarily every clause, but just to give an explainer in more typical language as to what the clauses mean. That's something that we still we can chase up the department on that to see if that is coming. But I know that's something that they were certainly considering. That might help.
Okay, well, I suppose I haven't made my way through all the correspondence that I've received, and maybe it's something we will come back to next week. And might have crystallised a wee bit more around the areas that are still quite grey for a lot of people.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on then to correspondence, members. So we'll refer you to pages 240 to 242 of the pack for the summary of committee correspondence. I just would like to draw your attention to a number of items. 8.2 was a request to brief the Committee on Human Rights and Constitutional Change received from Colin Harvey from Queen's University. You'll find this on page 243. So Many of you will know Professor Colin Harvey at Queen's has been working on human rights constitutional change in the island of Ireland for some time. He has requested to that we hold an oral evidence session with the committee to update members on current developments on this issue. So I'm asking you to note this and to consider writing to Professor Harvey outlining the committee does not share an agreed position on this issue, and any current updates should be sent in the form of a written piece to the committee or to individual members. People agreed? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, I agree with that proposal, Chair. I would comment, I'm surprised how Professor Harvey describes his working role. You know, he says working on human rights and constitutional change in the island of Ireland. I mean, that is a political objective, constitutional change in the island. I'm surprised. I don't know if that's how Queen's University would describe his role. When I looked up the website, there's something about constitutional law, which is an area of study. But I would comment on that in his letter to us on Queen's University Belfast paper, saying that he's working on constitutional change in the island of Ireland. Yeah, I do. I don't know if he's conflating his personal views with his employed role. Okay. But I do question whether Queen's University would describe that as the purpose of his employment.
Well, your query is noted. I suppose he's not here to respond to it, so I think we'll leave it at that. Okay, so 8.3 to 8.4, Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council and Ards and North Down Borough Council response to correspondence of this 7th of May, and this in relation to the Local Change Fund. So members, you'll find these pieces of correspondence on pages 244 to 249. So, as I say, the committee's received these responses following its request on the 7th of May for details on the allocation of the Local Change Fund in relation to the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Strategic Framework. So I'm just asking you to note this correspondence and seek your agreement to consider further action when responses have been received from all local council areas. So the committee has received from all councils except for 2. So we're now going to name and shame, and they are Belfast City Council and Newry Morning Down District Council.
Oh, Ballycrack.
I know. I know.
Yes,
so I believe you have been chasing.
Wait, yes.
Yeah.
So they're the last 2 currently, Chair.
Yes.
Okay, and we did note the forward work programme in this space. Okay, so the Executive Office responds to correspondence of the 16th of May, final budget allocations for 2025 to 2026, disaggregation of PFG priorities. You'll find these on pages 255 to 257 of your pack. So just to advise, the committee has received a response to the committee's correspondence on the 16th of May requesting this information on final budget allocations and how the £2 million allocated to end of violence against women and girls within the programme for government will be spent. So just to advise that the end of violence against women and girls programme was provided with a programme resource style budget of £1.441 million for 25-26 as a result of a successful bid at the start of the year. A further £2 million was also provided, specifically ring-fenced for this programme. Funding this year will be used to meet the objectives of the first delivery plan, which includes local and regional community-based action. So I'm asking you to note this correspondence and also to ask if there's any other correspondence you wish to discuss.
Thank you.
No? Okay, no problem. So I suppose that final line then, Assistant Clerk, around the first delivery plan, which includes local and regional community-based action, I suppose that's really the purpose of this request for them to come before us in the post summer recess. Okay, yes. So draft forward work programme, members, you'll find this on page 258 to 261 of your pack. I'm just going to ask the Assistant Clerk to talk through the changes to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So it's only the one change, and that's just to say that today's oral briefing with the First and Deputy First Minister has been rescheduled to the very first oral briefing that we'll have on our first meeting back after summer recess on the 10th of September.
Okay, thank you. Any other business, members? Okay, thank you. So our next meeting, final meeting of this term, will be next Wednesday at 2 p.m. in this room. So the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, signed.